Welcome to another deep dive with us. Today we're tackling a grammar topic that I know trips a lot of people up, but don't worry, we're going to break it down and make it fun, I promise. We're talking about the present simple and the present continuous tenses.
And those sound really similar, but they both deal with the present, so what's the difference?
Yeah, what is it about?
Yeah.
More than just talking about what we're doing right now.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So let's start with the present simple, okay? And you can think of the present simple as kind of like the foundation of the present tense in English. It's what we use for habits, routines, things that are always true.
Okay. So if I say I drink tea every morning, that's present simple because it's like a regular part of my routine.
Exactly. And what's cool about the present simple is that it goes beyond just our own personal routines, right? It also applies to universal truths and facts.
You mean like scientific laws and things?
Yes, exactly. Things like the sun rises in the east or water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. These are unchanging truths, so they're perfect examples of when we use the present simple.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so let's maybe break down the structure of the present simple. How do we actually use it in a sentence?
Well, the good news is that it's pretty straightforward, especially compared to some of the other tenses that English likes to throw at us. So you generally start with the subject, right? So a person or thing doing the action, and then you follow that with the base form of the verb.
So in my to example, I would be the subject, and then drink would be that base form of the verb.
You got it, exactly. And the only change you really need to remember is adding an S to the verb when you're talking about someone in the third person singular. So he, she, or it.
So he drinks tea every morning.
Simple as that.
Simple as that.
Of course, English has a few irregular verbs up its sleeve, but we'll save those for another deep dive. For now, just remember those basic rules and you'll be well on your way to mastering the present simple.
Okay, so we've talked about the present simple. What about its more energetic cousin?
Right. So if the present simple is all about routine and permanence, the present continuous is its more spontaneous, dynamic, counterpart.
Yeah, it's like the present simple's friend who always has something going on.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, the present continuous, it tells us about actions that are happening right now at the moment of speaking or around this general time. So think of it as capturing a moment in progress.
So if I'm talking to you right now and I say I am recording a podcast, that's the present continuous in action.
You got it. It paints that picture of an action that's unfolding right now in real time. But, and here's where it gets interesting, it's not always about this very second.
Okay, so there's a little bit more flexibility with the present continuous. It's not just about what we are doing right now.
Exactly. So imagine a student who says, I'm studying for finals these days. They don't literally mean they're studying every single minute of every single day.
It's more about their overall state right now. Finals are consuming their lives.
Exactly. So the present continuous can describe something temporary, something that's happening around now, even if it's not happening the very second that we speak.
This is kind of reminding me of how people always mix up these two tenses when they're talking about their hobbies.
Oh, it's a very common mistake.
Yeah?
Yeah, and using the wrong one can completely change the meaning of what you want to say.
Okay, well, let's break it down then. How do we form the present continuous? It seems a little bit more complex than the present simple.
You're right. It's got a couple more moving parts, we could say. We start with a form of to be, so either am, is, or are, depending on the subject.
So I am, he, she, it is, way you, they are. Got it. And then
we tack on the ing form of the main verb, so watch becomes watching, read becomes reading, and so on.
So to say I'm in the middle of watching a movie right now, it would be I am watching a movie.
Perfect.
Yeah.
You can hear how that ing ending really emphasizes the ongoing nature of the action, right? It's happening right now as we speak.
Okay, so the present continuous is all about painting a picture of an action in progress. It's about immediacy. It's about capturing that energy of the present moment. But how do we know when to use each tense? And what happens when those lines get a bit blurry? So we've got these two ways of talking about the present, right? One for the everyday stuff and one for right now. But it feels like there's some overlap. How do we really know which one to use?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Because it's not just about what you're saying, it's also about that subtle message you're trying to get across.
Okay, so give me an example. When does using the wrong one actually change the meaning?
All right, let's say you're at a cafe and someone asks, what are you reading? You wouldn't answer with, I read novels, because that speaks more to a general habit.
Yeah, you would want to say, I'm reading a novel to show that you're engaged in that activity, like right now in that moment.
Exactly. Even though both of those sentences are grammatically correct, I'm reading, the present continuous is a much more natural and accurate response to that question about your current action.
So it's about choosing the tense that best fits what you're talking about, the context of the conversation.
Right. It's like choosing the right tool for the job. And sometimes there are these subtle differences in meaning, even when both tenses seem like they could work.
This is reminding me of like those classic grammar mistakes with stative verbs.
Oh, absolutely. That's a perfect example of where things can get a little tricky. So stative verbs, words like love or believe, they describe states of being rather than actions, and they usually don't take that ing form.
So saying something like, I am loving this podcast,
Yeah.
that would sound a bit strange.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah.
And while it is grammatically possible, it just sounds unnatural because love is a stative verb. We would just say, I love this podcast.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. These are the kinds of nuances that I think make English so interesting to learn, but also kind of challenging at times.
Absolutely. But by paying attention to these little subtleties, you're not just like memorizing grammar rules, you're really gaining a deeper understanding of how English actually works, like how we use the language to express ourselves with more precision and nuance.
Yeah, it's like you said earlier, choosing the right tool for the job. And like the more tools you have in your grammar toolbox, the more effectively you can communicate the message that you want to say.
Exactly. And the great thing is the more you practice, the more natural it becomes to just choose the right tense without even having to like think about it.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today into the present simple and the present continuous, what would you say is the key takeaway for our listeners?
I'd say don't be afraid to experiment. Listen to how these tenses are being used in everyday conversations, in books, in movies, and just pay attention to those subtle differences in meaning that they convey.
That's great advice. Because ultimately, language is all about communication. It's about connecting with others and expressing ourselves with clarity and confidence.
Absolutely. And mastering these foundational tenses is a huge step towards achieving that goal.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. We explored the present simple, the backbone of routines and unchanging truth, the present continuous, capturing that dynamism of the moment, and we even touched on those tricky stative verbs.
It's been a pleasure diving into these nuances with you. And remember, grammar isn't about just memorizing a bunch of rules. It's about really understanding the tools that we have at our disposal to be able to express ourselves more effectively.
So to all of our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep practicing, and keep those grammar questions coming. Until next time on The Deep Dive.